Hello, my name's Mark. I'm here to teach, not sure that's the word, conduct the webinar today. Hang on, I'll just move that around. I don't want to blind anybody. Okay, I can see, great, I can see 40 people here. Hello, Cyrus. Thank you for calling in. If a few of you just tell me where you're from, it's nice, as well as your name. It's always interesting to know where people are coming from. And also, well, just a bit of housekeeping. Oh, hello. Oh, hello, Kingston, Jamaica. Hello, Carol. That's a good one. That's a good distance. Always nice to know who's the furthest away. Canada, Cape Town, brilliant. Texas, somebody else from Canada. You're quite Quebec, Canada. Quite a few of you from Canada. It's been quite crowded in there. Fantastic. Somebody from Oman, France. Great. Anyway, yeah, keep going, but that's great. Hello to you all. As I said, my name's Mark. I've been teaching for about 32 years now. I've been a director of studies, teacher trainer for about 15 years. And I work mainly now with the military, because like most grown men, I'm actually an 8-year-old boy at heart. So I kind of like teaching guns and bombs. And I've been marking for TEFL Academy for about four or five years now. So I'm going to use a bit of that experience as well. I'll try to make it not just about grammar, but also about how you conduct your assignment as well, which I think is obviously going to be, kind of what you're after as well. So as you know, the seminar is going to be about grammar. Last bits of housekeeping. Obviously, the camera's a bit blurry. I'm not sure what I can do about that. As long as you can hear me, okay, that's the most important thing. Hang on, yeah, I think I've got it on the right one here. Okay, I'll try not to move around too much. Okay, bit of housekeeping. Obviously, you're all coming in saying hi, which is absolutely great. Hello, Germany. Hello, all the South Africans and all the Canadians, and hello from England as well. Good to see one or two from GB. Great. The housekeeping is just ask questions anytime. There will be a Q&A session at the end, but please ask questions at any time. I will do my best to show them up, but I'll do my best to answer them all. So either ask a question while you're thinking about it, that's great, or just leave it till the end. And quite often, if one of you asks a question, I respond to the question, and then that leads to further questions. That's absolutely great as well. My one thing is, please try to keep it relevant to grammar. I will try to push it on to what you're all trying to do as well, but let's try to keep it on the grammar rather than how the hell do I answer assignment C or something like that, which obviously is going a bit off topic. Okay, there's a really good competition here to see who's the furthest away, but I've got Kazakhstan, hello, and Hong Kong as well. Brilliant. Okay, so first thing, obviously, given what we're talking about, is what is grammar? And oddly enough, because we have a fairly lively kind of academic interest in this, there's all sorts of arguments as to what grammar actually is, but we'll stick with the way that it is organized, the way that language is organized, and we'll make that as distinct from vocabulary. There are trains of thoughts that say that vocabulary is simply a more attenuated form of grammar, and that's where you have the lexical method, which you will probably encounter at some time or other. Second bullet point, don't expect to ever know everything. Sadly, this remains the case, even if you've been doing it for 30 years. But it's also what makes it fascinating as well. It is, as it says here, a massive and complex topic. And the first thing really that you always need to consider is what you already know. And that's a funny one because, of course, most of us, I guess, will come from English-speaking, maybe not English-speaking educational systems, which tend to focus on the creativity of language rather than just trying to move that around a bit, rather than the formal construction. And that means that we don't come out of this understanding our language. We know how to use it correctly, but that's not at all the same as being able to tell the difference, say, between the present simple and the present perfect. So the first thing we need to understand about ourselves is that we don't know everything. And it also means that left on the spot, you probably, or it's certainly possible, that you aren't able to explain the rules of grammar to somebody else. It's not a problem. In fact, it's important you don't expect to know everything. And if your knowledge of grammar is not very good, then you're going to learn, and you'll learn, of course, the best way of learning is by teaching as well. So it's important to think about what you know, and it's also that you need to know what you're going to study before you teach a class. Do remember as well that when you start, you probably won't have high-level classes, and so you'll have to think about communicating just one function. And an example of this is, I don't know how many of you are doing the level 3 exam rather than the level 3 assignments rather than the level 5 assignments. But if you're doing level 3, the past continuous, I was doing, he was going, she was doing, they were seeing, whatever it may be, is you just do it for one function, and that function is interrupted action. So I was doing this when that happened. So you're teaching the past continuous along with the past simple and working and using the two together. It doesn't exist in isolation. And at the end of the assignment, there's a nice little reflection part, which is great. Sally Ann, good to see you're doing level 3. And when you do this, you do the reflection at the end. And what often comes up so many times is when there's a question there about what do you wish you'd done, what would you change the next time? And I would say a huge percentage of people say, you know what, I'd have looked at the target language more carefully, because it was as they were preparing that they found out that what they were preparing wasn't actually suitable to that specific function, i.e. interruption. And therefore, a lot of the time they had to just start again and build the whole thing again. So knowing the target language is such an important thing, first of all, for the preparation of your specific assignment. And secondly, because it just makes you a better teacher. And I often put in actually that, learning this stuff, researching this stuff, it's never wasted. It's such a beneficial thing for you to do, because of course, once the information is in there, it'll come back all the more quickly the next time that you do it. Okay, so let's just go on. Okay. And so you'll often see this expression, target language. Markers use it all the time when they're talking about your assignment. So you'll see it all the time. Often it's just reduced to its initials, so the TL. Okay. So if we're going to teach the future simple, that's our target language for the class. And therefore, as well, while we're talking about it, the aim of the class is, the central aim is to teach the future simple. Taking it from that very quickly, just to say the aim of the class is therefore to make sure that the students can do X with the target language. They understand the target language, they recognize the target language, they can use the target language fluently. You need to decide what your specific aim is there. So I'll jump on from that one just a little bit. Meaning, form, and phonology, MFP, which I'm sure you have seen. If you've read the course content with even half of an eye, you'll have picked up on meaning, form, and phonology. I would, however, like to add another term to this, and it's a term that comes up later, but I think it's very important that we look at this now, and that is context. Now, context is not part of meaning, form, phonology, but it's what you use to teach the first one of these, which is meaning. Now, you can kind of change it around a little bit. And so we normally teach them in this order, meaning, form, and phonology. You can, however, change round form and phonology. Phonology, of course, being the pronunciation, form being the actual words, so the spelling, the order, what we call the syntax. Meaning, however, always comes first. And To illustrate that, I'll just give you an example. If I was teaching the past continuous, so I was doing the level 3 exam, and I said, "Good morning, class. Today we're going to learn the past continuous, and the form is subject, I plus was or were, the past simple of the verb to be, plus verb ing, the present participle." It's just words. What we need always is context, and context is the idea of, I suppose, creating a need that they're thinking, okay, I can see what's happening here, but I don't have the words to express that. So you're creating something that they need to resolve. And that creation of something that needs resolution, creating the interest in the class, is the context. If you look at any course book, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you, have looked in course books at some point or other, you'll notice that when you come to a particular unit, the grammar, it's not going to start past continuous. It's going to start with, talking about what happened on your holidays or something like that. So the subject matter will be your holidays. It's not going to be past continuous. So we always go into the language by establishing a context. And of course, that context has to be appropriate to the actual target language. So we'll take these through again: meaning, how and why it is used. And as we also said before in slide 2, it might be the specific function. So it's not just the whole of a particular grammatical item, we shall call it. It's not the whole of it. It might be one specific use that we're looking at. Form, as I said, the way that it is all arranged. In fact, I'll just jump onto this so you've got a better idea of this. How we make the target language: subject plus will plus infinitive for future simple. And phonology, what it sounds like. Just a quick thing. There's little distinction between phonology and pronunciation. Phonology is it's the subject of study. Pronunciation is what we use most of the time to say, this is how you say it. Good point as well that's made here on the slide as well: drilling contractions. We don't normally believe in the idea that you teach the full form, I will do this, and then bring in the contraction later. If that's the way it's said, then that's the way it's taught. And that's made very clear. That's made very clear from the start. Also bear that in mind if you're doing level 5 assignment B in the PPP plan. The first thing that you do, you have to look at the pronunciation. I believe it's section 5. Obviously, you need to look at the stress, which is incredibly important. Look at the words that are stressed, but you also need to look at the contraction and the intonation, the way the voice goes up and the way that the voice goes down. I point these out because, trust me, I've marked many thousands of them and not everybody gets that one nailed. So those are our 3: MFP, and as we've said, that we lead to the meaning via the context that we choose, and that context needs to be specific to the target language. So there's no particular point in talking about your holidays in the past if you're going to be teaching the first conditional, and there's no point in talking about what you're doing at the weekend if you're talking about the past continuous. One must be appropriate to the other. Okay, so this is absolutely, as it says here, a key concept in teaching grammar. And just so we are clear about that, we're going to look at 2 concepts that will come up all the time, which is elicitation, and concept checking. And if you learn nothing else from this, please get this one fixed on. Eliciting is what you do before they have seen the target language. Concept checking, which we're going to look at a little bit later, is what you do after they have encountered the target language. Elicitation before, concept checking after. That's such a big distinction to make because obviously it changes the approach in both of those parts. Eliciting is the idea that you are trying to get the language out of them. They are the ones who should be coming up with this, which is, again, going back to what I said at the start, you never start a lesson Hello, I'm going to teach you the past continuous. I was doing something or other. That's not your job. That's the job of the students to come up with that. Okay. So a good example of this, okay, an example, maybe not a good example, is today I am at school. Tomorrow I at school. And of course, you're looking for eliciting will and be at school. Having said that, it's a pretty rubbish example because they need more to interest themselves, but they need more to get interested in before they actually do that. You would never start a class with that. You need far more. You need to, as we said, get them interested in something, really give them a problem, give them an issue to work with there. But that's a basic form of what you'd be looking at. You leave the gaps, you're expecting them to fill the gaps. Nowadays, and far more than when I was a student, or even when I was first teaching, you're going to encounter classes which come from far more various directions in terms of what they've learned, because their ways of exposing themselves to English are so much more varied now. You might have somebody who's into gaming, plenty of people into football, loads of people who are into understanding song lyrics. And so when you come up with a little bit of language and you need to elicit it, you can only do that, first of all, if somebody actually knows it. If none of them know it, you can't elicit. But the process is still important anyway. But you'll find much more often than you would have, because they haven't all studied the same stuff, the same curriculum, they've got exactly the same knowledge. You'll find that very often somebody will come up with something and they'll be able to understand something, and that's great. They are the ones, and it's come from them, and that's really, really important for this. Okay, but do remember, if no one knows the language, you can't do it. Okay. We've popped this in here. When I've been preparing this in the part of this particular webinar in the past, I've kind of wondered about having this in here, but here it is: the tenses, which is of course the most basic form of grammar that you're going to encounter and that you're going to teach. And the four of each for your 12 basic tenses: obviously the simple, the continuous, the perfect, and the perfect continuous. So in the simple, that is, I have been doing something. Present perfect continuous you've got here. You also got as it says here, the different names between the continuous and the progressive, or simple past, past simple. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. Unfortunately, the entire TEFL industry has not yet managed to decide on whether it should be called the continuous or the progressive, and just stick with one. I apologize for that. Okay, as I said at the start, look at the first bullet point here: research and know your MFP. If you think you know one function, that's fine when you're starting, because when you start, you probably only need to teach one function. As you go on further, then you will understand further functions, and you'll be able to delineate much more clearly. We'll have a look at this fairly shortly. With that, I'll just give you an example again of a context, which is what I mentioned at the start. And I mentioned it at the start, although it comes up in this slide 8. It's important that we talk about that, because it's the first thing you think about when you're preparing, after you've thought about the function and you've done your research. So if you're talking about, say, the past continuous, I'll give you an example. You tell the students about how you came to school this morning. You say you crossed the road and you fell over. You don't say, while I was crossing the road, I fell over, or I fell over when I was crossing the road. You don't say that. I say, I fell over, I crossed the road. And in that way, you are creating a need to use the target language. You could do the same with the first conditional if you're doing the level 5 assignment, and you might think about asking about their plans for the weekend. Now, there's two things, or there's really two approaches that you can have with that. If you're asking people, you're teaching the first conditional, which is if this happens, then I will do that. Or if I do this, then this will happen, etc., etc. So if you use an example of the weekend plans, you might already have in your mind a model sentence, a particular sentence that you want to elicit from them. So you might tell them a story about yourself, and you might sort of talk about, well, okay, I want to go to the beach. What weather do I need if I want to go to the beach? So eventually, of course, you're looking for, if it's good weather, if it's sunny, I will go to the beach. Once you're a little bit more experienced and you have more fun doing this, you put it all out to the students. And then you start saying, okay, what are you doing? And then you start being more spontaneous. You start picking out something that the students, that one of the students wants to do, something that's weather dependent. And then you start using the other students to say, okay, how can we make sure that this happens? How do we do this? It doesn't have to be the weather. It could be somebody saying, I'm going to play Xbox. And you say, okay, what do you have to do first? And eventually it's, I have to do my chores, I have to do my homework. Okay, if you finish your homework, what will happen next, etc., etc. So you start using what they come up with, and that's more interesting for the students, of course, because you're using their language to create the need for them to express the particular expression that they have come up with, rather than something that you've invented and foisted on them, if you like. Okay. And the second part that we're talking about, so after elicitation, you've got your model sentence that's come up, whether it's come from you and you've got it out of them, or whether you've used what the utterances of the students to say, okay, this is what we've got. You've got the model sentence. You've checked on the form. So once you've got the model sentence up there, okay, what's this? What do we call that? It's the subject. And as we'll have a quick look at the end of the lesson, good to use that terminology, because that terminology then comes back when you're teaching other grammatical forms as well. Okay, what follows that? What's this word here? It's will. What's will? Well, it's an auxiliary. Okay, what does it express? It expresses the future. What follows it? It's a verb. What kind of a verb is it? It's the infinitive. Yeah, not just the present simple, not just the present simple. It is the infinitive. And so you go through like that. And so you can build up the model sentence, but you get it from the students. The students have created that. Following that, CCQs. You are asking concept checking questions. Now, there is, I think there's really two forms of concept checking questions. One is the ones which are yes and no. So if you've got a word like, say, furious, if you were teaching a piece of vocabulary, if you had the word furious, and a simple one to ask this would be, do you think this person is really happy, or do you think they are really unhappy? And if they say unhappy, then they've got a good idea that, okay, yes, they understand what the word furious means. Are they a little bit unhappy, or are they a little bit angry? Are they very, very angry? Yes, they're very, very angry. So we've got another idea. Another way of doing that is to make it more open. And I think this is a better idea. Both of these work together, but it's much easier to ask the yes/no questions, and that's absolutely fine. But if you want to extend and really test that understanding, then start asking for examples. So again, if you're looking at, say, level 5, and you've done the first one, those of you who have done it, you've got the fortnight text, and you have to pick out the vocabulary words for this. And so the CCQs here might be something like, okay, give me some examples of characters, because characters is one of the words in the text. Give me some examples of characters in some of the games that you've played, and they have to explain the character. And that explains more what a character is than just saying, is a character a real person, or is it an imaginary person? So there's a yes/no answer, and there's a greater one, and the same goes for grammar very well. How do you get them to expand their own knowledge and to show other people and to show off what they can actually do? The time reference as well, which is something I think we'll have a quick look at in the next in the next one, in terms of a timeline. And unlike what I'm doing today, don't brush it. There should be always in a grammar lesson a point at which you look at the language. You're not just looking at the model sentence and saying, okay, does this mean that did I stop the action here, or did the action continue? You're saying, look at this language as the language itself in general. What is true of every part, every time that you use this particular piece of language? And that's a little bit different, but a good way of doing this is to use timelines here, which I'm going to come back to in a second, but just so we know what timelines are. And when it says don't rush it, you have that little stage of the lesson, but that little stage of the lesson doesn't have to be very long. It can only often just be 2 or 3 minutes where you're saying, okay, this is the form, this is a model sentence. What can we say that is true about this in all cases? What is always true about this? And of course, that allows them to start thinking about it in other situations as well. And that's the bit you don't need to rush, because it's a very short but very, very important, very rich part of the lesson. And a central part, particularly with tenses, but also with conditionals, and this is an example of it, is the timeline. And it's great because it's visual rather than just your words coming out. And obviously, that visual aspect is often more important. As I said, this is an example from assignment B. And just look at what it shows here. You've got 2 clauses. You've got the if clause and you've got the main clause. If clause is if the weather is good. The main clause is I'll go to the beach. What better way of explaining to them that the if clause is prior to the main clause, but at the same time it is in the future, because it's if, and if it's if, it can't be about the present. But I would say that probably 70 or 80% of the assignments that I get say if in the present, main clause, I will in the future, because they've just looked at the tense and said, right, that's how it is. That is not actually the case. If you look at any timeline for the first conditional, it will show you that the if clause can be any time from the present into the future, but it cannot be bang on the present because it hasn't happened yet. That's why it's an if. So what better way of illustrating it than to use a timeline effectively like this? And it's also something they can copy down in their books, take a photo, whatever they want to do, and they've got it for another time. Okay, moving on. Following this, so at this point, just to go through it, you've had your context, you've elicited the model sentence, you've shown form, you've shown pronunciation, and you've done your concept checking questions as well, although those latter ones can be in any order that you want. Then you go on to your controlled practice. This is a really, really important step, aren't they all, after all? But this gives you some proper visual ideas of what it's actually constructed and how they do it. They need some input into constructing this. Okay, and I'll just give you an example of this. This is particularly for grammar. That if you're using a gap fill, which is the most common one that we use here, remember to gap the whole tenses, not just part of a tense. And if I give you an example of that, if you leave the gap on will and you just leave will out, then they just work it out by logic. Well, hang on, that clause, that half of the sentence, that doesn't have it. So this one's got a gap, so I just drop will in there. That's too simple. And they're not understanding it by understanding the context. They could also, and this is a point here, if you have a look at this and it says there is only one right answer. So they could also, therefore, if it's will, they might also use can, might, or may. And those are variations that for a low-level class and an A2 level class, you don't want to get into that for the moment. You just want to keep it on the nice, simple, subject plus will plus infinitive, subject plus future plus, sorry, you know what I'm talking about here. The basic form of it using will. Okay. The same goes if you use the gap on just one tense, because they can see what the other tense is. So if you just leave one gap, then they go, well, hang on, that one's present simple, so this one must be future simple, or the other way around. If you leave the gap on the action itself, on the verb, then it becomes a vocab exercise. Oh God, what goes in there? I can see that it's a future simple, but I don't know what future simple it is. I've only got the other tense to guide me. On the other hand, if you leave 2 gaps and you leave the verbs in brackets, and then they have to work out if it's going to be future simple or if it's going to be present present simple, and they've got to work out which one's which. And from that, they've got to work out the context of the entire sentence, work out what the sentence is going to say, and then they have to drop in which one is which. And then they're trying to work out, okay, so which one works here, which one goes first. So there's a logic behind that. It means there's only one right answer, but they have had to actually think. They can't just copy it straight off the other examples that they have had for this. So even a gap fill exercise takes a bit of thinking about, to think, okay, how do we give the students some input onto this, but how do we make it not impossible for them? How do we make sure that we're not testing other things such as vocab that they might have already done? So you kind of make it a bit of an either or for them. Give them confidence, give them input, and give them some familiarity with the form that they can then use in the next part of it, which of course is the free practice. And of course, and I say of course, but plenty of people try to put the free practice before they put the control practice. The control practice must happen first. If they haven't got a chance to practice the TL, they won't be able to reproduce it confidently or correctly when they're speaking. And that's obviously the focus on the free practice. The free practice tasks focus on fluency. You actually want them trying to come up with sentences, maybe not perfect, but as good as they can be, ones that you can then say, okay, that's great. Let's try that again. Put it out to the class. What did this student say? That's great, but come on, let's see if we can do it a little bit better. So think about an activity that gets them to practice the target language. And again, like your context, it needs to be fitted to the target language. So you need to really think hard about, okay, what's the situation that they can find themselves in that's going to use that specific target language. Don't ask them to talk about their hobbies, but use the past continuous. Doesn't work. You've got to think of something specific. If you're going to come up with a role play, which is great, that's fabulous if you do that, but don't just say they're going to act out a scenario. You've got to say what the scenario is. You've got to say what the characters are. You've got to say what the resolution is. It's difficult to do, but really rewarding if you get it right. And if you get one right and you think, okay, that's absolutely the right free practice, that's the right context, that does everything necessary, you won't just use it in the assignment. You'll be using that when you become a teacher as well. It's a good thing to have. Anything that you create, of course, I know it, you probably thought about this before, anything that you've used before, you've got it in your locker for later. Always really useful. Okay, then. So I think that pretty much covers those parts of it. Other forms here, syntax, also known as word order. A big one if you're English, if you're speaking English rather than French, adjective plus noun, not the other way around. Countable and uncountables, modal verbs, conditionals, and loads more. One of the great things is, as you start to learn these things, is that a lot of this, okay, you follow a curriculum, you might have to do it to a particular point, but so much of this just comes up in the lesson, which is absolutely great. And you can either go, okay, right, I'll tell you what, we've got 5 minutes. Let's just look at this now, because this student has used it. So let's see if we can just polish it. They've got an idea of it. So let's see if we can get this a little bit better, and everybody benefits. We bring everybody into this. And we call that emergent language when you're working with what the students say. And it's one of the things that I really think that as you become more experienced as a teacher, and you work more and more off what they are giving you rather than the contents of a course book that you have to teach them. You still have to teach them that because you've got your responsibilities to the school, to the curriculum, to the exam they need to pass or whatever else. But you can do so much with what they come up with. And that leads to something else. And it's something that I mentioned a little bit at the start, but there's actually a kind of manifestation of this. Something I mentioned at the start is how they've all got different inputs now. So different students might understand different things differently. And they might have separate understandings of things. And some people will actually have encountered a particular grammar point at a certain time. And you can use that because what it means is that often in the lesson, you're not just teaching something, but this is the first time you've ever seen it. It's something new. The very fact that we can elicit means that they've encountered it before. And so a lot of the time as TEFL teachers, you're not teaching absolutely new language. You're teaching things that they have already encountered in differing forms at different times in the past. And so what you're doing is not presenting just new language. You're moving it along. Even if they say, we've said that, they say, we've learnt it. Okay, you've learnt it, but can you reproduce it? Can you use that spontaneously? Can we go straight to free practice? No, we can't. You can regurgitate the rules because you've been taught those, but what you're doing is you're moving it along that continuum. So they're going from I know the rules to I can use this as part of my spontaneous unthinking output. And so a lot of the time what we're doing is moving things along rather than actually teaching them as something fresh that they've never encountered before. And that's really worth thinking about. And that comes up, like I say, when we say here, grammar isn't just tenses. All of these things might pop up at some point or other, and they might be really, really interesting to teach. Maybe it's the two-minute lesson and go, right, okay, let's got that one. Let's look at what the correct form is. That's really good, but come on, we can do this even better. Okay, a few extra tips here for teaching grammar. Take it one point at a time, which is when you are less experienced, because that kind of contradicts what I just said. But take it one point at a time is absolutely fine, because that's still going to be the central aim of what your lesson is. Don't beat yourself up for not understanding it well enough. You are not alone. Very, very few people will understand the language. And very often people who understand the language in the sense that we're talking about in terms of form, meaning, less so pronunciation, but certainly in terms of form and meaning, are people who are not native English speakers, because they have learnt it in that same form. Take your own notes to revise. That's always a great one. And although it's not maybe directly linked to this, I would suggest that your notes aren't just notes on the actual language, they're notes on what has worked and what hasn't worked so well. As any teacher, if you're not reflecting on what you do, you're pretty much lost as a teacher. I mean, I taught a lesson yesterday, and I still came out of that lesson thinking, okay, what did I do wrong? What could I do better? You never ever stop doing that. As I mentioned before, learn and use the correct terminology. That's so useful for your students as well, because it can then be recycled. Once they understand continuous, perfect, conditional, they'll all come in handy. Subjective, auxiliary, plus infinite, all of it. It's really, really useful stuff for them. And it means that you actually can move things along more quickly. And also, as it says here, play the long game. This comes back to what I was just mentioning sometimes about the fact that you're not going to teach something from fresh and then make it something that they can use perfectly from then on. The human brain just doesn't work like that, and the human mouth certainly doesn't. You're going to move things along a little bit. They're going to get a little bit stronger in something. Don't ever think that, okay, hang on, I taught them this week. Why aren't I taught them this particular grammatical point last week? Why aren't they fluent in it this week? Because it just doesn't work like that. They need to revise, the same as they need to revise vocabulary. They'll need to be reminded of it all the time. And a lot of the time, subsequent to your lesson, they might use that target language. They might use it incorrectly. Don't beat yourself up about that. That's simply part of the process. And what they're talking about here is maybe not so much systemic errors, which means that they don't understand it. It's just that it gets scrambled between the brain and the mouth, and it's what we just call a slip of the tongue. And you will, as a teacher, you will constantly have to be thinking, is that systemic? Do I need to work on about that? Or is that something that I can just ask them to recast? It's an opportunity. If somebody makes a mistake, it's an opportunity in the class. You might say, that's great. Can you do that again? Can you think about this word? You can recast it. You can actually say it, and then maybe put a question mark on that word. And so they go, okay, what's that word? You can throw it open to the class so everybody gets a chance to think about it. It depends on the dynamic of your class as to whether you can do that or not. These are all part of what makes you a teacher. You're able to sniff it and think, okay, what can I do with these guys? What can't I do with them? Can I actually pick up a mistake from one student without humiliating them? By the way, my experience about this is something that the TEFL industry are very, very worried about sort of isolating individual students. If Very simply, if you are a good teacher, if you create a good dynamic and you're not in a very culturally specific class, you can say to them, look, you speak up, one of you makes a mistake, mistakes are good, we work on the mistake, we make it better, and everybody benefits. Don't be worried about making them. And people do not mind if you then say, right, you've got that wrong, can you make it right? They do not mind this at all. And in fact, when I've worked as a director of studies, which is what we call a senior teacher, one of the major complaints we always used to get from students was they don't correct enough. Teachers can get scared of correcting when actually that's one of the best things they can do, because it's working with that individual's own utterances and they love it. Okay, I think that's about it. We'll go on to the questions and answers now. So I've got a question already here from Quinn, which I will answer. But please, if you've got any further questions, I would really like to hear them now. So this is the point for doing that. Before we finish as well, I will post, actually, Quinn, I'm going to bring your question up here. Excellent question, for which thank you. So what if we find out that some students don't know the terminology? Should we stop and explain the terminology? Yes, in short. Obviously, what you can't do is explain every last bit of the terminology. You can't go through the whole lot. So maybe think about one term or two terms, and then the other ones will come in as you go. But yes, if you're trying to explain a fairly complex piece of grammar, no, you can't. You can't break it down into every single bit if they don't know any of them. But I would make a start would be my main advice on that one. Make a start, do one or two bits, and then those are bits that you can use later when you explain further ones. Okay. Sally Ann, could you suggest a good resource to learn how to teach grammar? Do you know what? It's a difficult one. And the reason why it's difficult is because you've got very largely as I said, you've got a TEFL industry and you've got a TEFL academic branch as well. We're very lucky in that sense. But what you do get quite often, I'm just having a look to see if I've got, yes, I have got a book here. I've got one right here that I'm going to show you in a second. And what you often have is you have academics arguing with each other. And if you're a trainee teacher and thinking, how can I pick the bones out of this? And when you need something simpler. And so I'm just going to get you a book. This is purely good luck that I've got it to hand here. I don't know. I hope he's going to pay me some money for this, but I doubt it very much. This is one of the very simplest books, but it's really, really good. Adrian Underhill, Jim Scrivener. There's two of them. This is great. Learning Teaching. In fact, I'm going to try to pop it in here. And I'll give you the author as well, which is Jim Scrivener. Okay, and I'll just show that for you. Okay. It's a good book because it breaks everything down. So you don't need to worry about reading the entire book. You need to, you can have a look at a specific chapter, and it's one that you'll go back to again and again. So I'd say that's a great resource. You've also got the British Council, which can be patchy in quality, but I'd say that gives you lots of good information as well. One thing I would be very suspicious of is taking too much stuff off the internet. No, I'll qualify that. Taking exercises off the internet, because they are often done by experienced teachers, fair enough, but they're done by experienced teachers who are doing them very, very quickly. And you see this in books as well, where you find that quite often you've got maybe 10 examples or something, but one of them doesn't actually, one or two of them maybe don't actually quite fit what you're teaching. And if you don't look at them very, very carefully beforehand, you can get caught out. And I've observed so many lessons where people have taught things and there's been something in there, there's been a slight exception to the rule. The person who's written it hasn't noticed, and then the person who's teaching it hasn't noticed it until it comes up, and it does make you look can make you look a bit silly. So be very careful when you take stuff off the internet, and often, cut and paste it and then change it to your own needs as well. Don't take everything that's out there as being absolute gospel. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, please ask a further question. Multilingually mother tongue students. So Cyrus, just to be clear about this, do you mean people who have got lots of different mother tongues, or do you mean people who speak several languages already? I'm going to take it, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to take it that you mean that a class where you have a multitude of different different mother tongues. I think in general that's great. It's good for a few reasons. One reason is you don't start getting translations of words stuck across. Thanks, you have different backgrounds. So you have the difference. You have, if you want to get them working in groups, and this isn't just about grammar, this can be about anything. If you get them working in groups, they've got greater interest in each other because they're coming from different places. Whereas when you've got say a school group of 14-year-old Spanish students, they've all grown up together, they all know each other, there's not much they can actually ask each other. They don't know, there's no actual curiosity there, there's just using the language. So I think that difference can be great. You do have to be careful because obviously there are sensitivities in there. As I've said to you, my general feeling is that those sensitivities can be overstated. And people aren't quite as made of glass or sugar as the TEFL industry would think that they are. But I do think it's something you have to be aware of. You certainly have to be aware of it in the subject matter. Course books nowadays are very neutral in that sense, so you're not going to come across anything that's going to offend people in a course book unless it dates back to the 1960s. But your own choices of materials, you do have to stop and think about. Apart from that, you're respectful to everybody, and also stay off a lot of topics, because people do have very, very different ideas to what we do, especially left-wing tree-hugging TEFL teachers. We assume that the whole world should think the way that we should, and they don't, and they're not going to, and it's not your job to change them. So I think don't ever make any assumptions of some sort of moral superiority over people who come from what we would see as being less progressive countries. But I think overall it is really, really interesting to do that, and you learn, which is what, as a teacher, as a good teacher, you should always learn, even if the lessons aren't always particularly pleasant for yourself either. Okay, right. If we're working with students with the same L1 and we are strong with that language, is it useful to break down the grammar structure in the L1, even if it is incorrect in the L1? Yeah, I know what you mean by that. I think it's a temptation. And Laurent, I'm guessing if you're talking about using French, it's probably the best language for this, because it's the one where where all the students get taught in that grammatical way. They always understand what these terms are. I would still say no, if possible. There's various reasons for this. I think it heads down, it takes you down a path that is dangerous in that you start a reliance on something that will then be expected in future lessons, which isn't great. The only thing I would say about that is occasionally, if you've got a word and and it's stopping the lesson from progressing, then maybe just drop that word in there in their own L1, because it just helps things going. But I think it should be as rare as possible. Also, in many languages, especially languages which take this from the Latin, a lot of the words are very, very similar. Anyway, adjective, infinitive, these are all, these are terms that work in both languages. So use the English term and let them work out what it actually is. Sorry, let them work out what the original term is. Okay. Teaching English grammar, what to teach and how to teach it. I know this book slightly. I haven't got it in my library. It's a great book, from what I recall. Anything that he writes is fabulous. The reason you might be better off with the book that I mentioned, which is Learning Teaching. I'm just going to show you Learning Teaching again, because I think, Quinn, you asked to have a quick look at that. The reason I would go for that rather than the teaching English grammar, which Sally Ann has mentioned, is simply because when you're learning this stuff, reading a chapter is much, much easier than reading an entire book. And then, what do you know? By next week, you might have done your grammar assignment. You might have done your L3A or your L5B. And what do you know? You need to start teaching vocabulary or reading or whatever else it may be. And then you've got to go on and say you've got another chapter on that. I do think that when you are looking at when you're reading reference books, I think you should treat them as that. Do not think that reading any book from cover to cover is going to help you. You are far, far better off reading small sections of text and learning them and rereading them and really taking the lessons from that. Reading a 300-page book on teaching English, yeah, I mean, my heart would break at the thought of it, let alone yours. So that's why I would go for reading chapters as well, reading a few pages that you can take to heart, maybe not agree with, but really learn and work with the concepts that are in there. Again, agreeing with them or otherwise, rather than trying to go for picking up an entire book. Okay, let's see. So Quinn, I hope that's helped that for you. Okay, right. Books and websites as well as the 3 assessments. I would say it's absolutely fine to get the books from the library. I'm trying to think. There's a few guys that are really great. I would say things like this are actually, somebody like Penier is great. I can't remember if it's 1 hour or 2 hours, but actually look at books that she's done, like things like 5-minute activities, which are absolutely great idea. 5-minute activities, and actually by looking at the activity can actually tell you more about how you should be teaching as well. And then look at activities, look at the grammar activities and go, okay, how does that fit in with what I do? Is that a controlled? Is that a free? Is it a semi-controlled activity? Could I use that to actually make part of the concept checking? You can do all sorts of things with them, and it's really just going back to the same idea of take a little bit of text, take a little bit of something when you're learning, and try to work with that rather than read books cover to cover. Don't try to take in too much text. It's not what works with students, so it's not what should work with teachers either. What we got here? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, my one foray into a foreign language is also French. I lived there for about 6 years, and I think why French is also fascinating for us is the way that it's taught so differently, and how French teachers have a very different idea. Various languages do seem to have this, where they are very happy to teach grammar, and then students come out of it not knowing how to ask for a cup of coffee in the target language after 10 years, because they know all the parts of language, which is great for teaching grammar, but it's why your responsibility is not to get them out there learning the rules. That's just the first start. That's what we call the procedural. Your job is to move them along so they're teaching, so that they're working on the output, so they can actually understand this, use this without thinking about it. You're looking for spontaneous production. That's the point that we're looking at. Okay. What we got here? Oh, thank you, Lauren. I'm hoping that that's whatever I've said and you're agreeing with me. It'll be a first if that's the case. Okay. Any other questions? I'll give you another 30 seconds, and there's something I need to post on here as well. I'm not sure. Oh, damn, I'm not sure it's working here. So I will try to come up with this again. Okay. Whoops, that's not what I want for the moment. Okay, so I would very much like you to, thank you, Jennifer, my pleasure. I'm going to see if I can bring this up. I would like you to see if you can just take a photo of the survey monkey, survey monkey there, as it's very useful to us. I'm just going to try to copy that and drop that in. I have tried this already and it looks like I've failed, so I'll give it a second go here. No, it's not going to happen for me. Okay, so instead of which, I'm just going to come out of here very quickly, have a look around desperately for what I need, which I haven't got. Damn. Okay. Oh, hang on. No, I've got it on grammar slides here instead. So what I'm going to just drop in instead is this, and hopefully we'll do the same thing. Okay, so I'll just pop that out for you as well, and hopefully that will do the same thing. Okay, thank you very much. I will leave that up there for a minute or two, but thank you very much for well, thank you very much for your kind comments. That's also really, really nice, because it's very difficult when you're here talking to a screen. One last thing I'd actually say about that is, one of the best things about teaching is that you're working with something where you're responding constantly to people. I started doing the webinars, sorry, about a year ago, and talking to a blank screen where you're getting nothing back is quite difficult. And one of the nicest things about teaching is that constant feedback that you're getting. You don't even know, not even when they're saying, it's not just from what they say, but actions, everything, glances, just everything will, that you really start working with to actually put your lesson together and to guide your lesson, which never goes in the same place twice. One of the wonderful things about teaching. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to end it now. I hope you've all managed to get the survey monkey down there. Did I? I'm not sure if I popped that up there. Just in case I didn't, I'm just going to leave it up there for a second. If you could copy that off, and then if you can do the feedback, that would be absolutely great. Okay, thank you so much, and hope to see you for another one again very soon. Okay, take care all. Goodbye.